Welcome back. So let's try and actually have a look at the different packages now that we know about interfaces. What packages did I create in order to try and make an onion architecture in the .NET framework? So what I did is I made a package pretty much for each of these layers that you see. I have a core package in the very center that contains some interfaces and some entities. I have a domain service package right here that contains interfaces and also domain implementations. And I have a user interface package that right now is just a console application, later it'll be a web API, and I have an infrastructure package that right now has repositories for saving data in memory, but later it'll be saving data to an actual SQL database, or an SQLite in my case. So that's what we're going to try and just have a look at inside Writer, so we know what's in what packages. So first let's have a look at the core package and what's actually inside that package. I'll go into Writer right here, I'll zoom a little bit, and I'll go to the core package, which is under the core solution folder, Innotech Video Application 2021 core. Here you'll notice a few things. I have the models. These are the models that are used specifically for the domain-specific things. I'll talk about it later, but models are different depending if they are inside database, or they are inside UI, or they're inside the business logic area. They might change. So in my case, I just made models that are only for the business logic or the business area, the domain area, the core area on its own, right? So that's why we have models right here, which can be used both by the UI and by the SQL package and by the domain later on. Again, remember, inside the clean architecture, we can always only talk inwards. So that means that if I look at the drawing again, I can only go inward into the application. I can never ask for something from the outside, so the interface can't say, give me something here. That's not possible. We can always only talk into this guy who talks into this guy. Okay, so that's a very important note to have. So what's inside the domain layer right here? Let's try and go back. First of all, I created the domain layer as its own project right here, again under the core solution folder. And here we have the interface for the video repository. This is a way for us to store and read data. Repository pattern is just a way for us to represent a table in database. So that's what the video repository is all about. And then there's actually also the implementation of the interfaces you saw in here in the core. So that's how we implement them inside this area. I'll dive more into that later in the series. So that's the domain, and that's actually the two different packages we needed in order to represent the very core of our application right here, these two red packages right here. The next thing is the infrastructure one, which is the outermost level. So this guy, he will be representing everything we can do in the external environment, meaning that maybe you want to build a printer where you can send a print request. Maybe you want to build an email server where you can send emails. Maybe you want to build a repository so you can save data to a database. And that's what I'm using it for. I'm using it for repositories right here. So I made a package called infrastructure. That's a solution folder. And under that one, I have a repository package for SQL right now. So that's the package you see right here. In that package, we have repositories that know how to communicate with the database. Right now, it's just an in-memory database that I made on my own, but still it represents a database. It has some entities. And notice right now, these guys are different than the model we have up here. So they are not the same. They are represented in different ways. One example right here is if you have a video entity, it uses a genre ID because it needs to know the ID of the genre in a database. But up in the video, it actually has a genre object because when we're working in object-oriented, we would expect to have a real object to work with. Don't worry, I'll dive more into that. I just want to show you that there are differences between these two. And another thing we have here is converters, because I want to be able to convert between the video entity and the video up here in the model. So that's just what that converter does for you. And then the final thing is, again, the repository that represents a table in the database. So that's what we have in that layer right there. And the final layer is the UI layer. And that represents right now our UI. And in our case, it's just a console application up here, but it could be anything. It could also be like a desktop application. It could be a mobile application. It could be a web API, a REST API, which we are going to build later. So right now, this is just a console application, what's in there. Very simple, we have a program, takes care of some dependency injection. Don't worry, we'll get back to that later. It has a menu, which kind of represents a real menu. So if you guys remember when we ran the program last time, you could see that we get a menu like this, where we can go in and type information. So we have a menu, so if I press 2, I can see all my videos. There are none right now, but still, that's the idea behind that menu that is creating right here. Every time the menu wants to execute something, it'll actually call a service. Actually, it'll call the interface. Now, that's a very exciting thing when we're talking about the clean architecture. So we'll dive into that in the next video about how this service can actually send data all the way down to the database and get it all the way back from the database to present it inside our UI. So let's end it there. Now you kind of have an idea about how I took the Onion architecture and each of the layers in there, each of these different layers, and I posted them or put them into a package setup inside the .NET framework.